Hey, how you all going? It's Jai, that Aussie metal guy here with crank.com and with that metal station. Today I'm getting to have a chat with Ben Hutcherson from Khemmis, who are due to release their fourth full-length album, Deceiver, which comes out 19th of November through Nuclear Blast. It's a ripping album. Ben, cheers for joining me, man.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, my friend. I'm very excited to be here with you and to speak to the wonderful folks in Australia.
Yeah, man. First off, dude, I want to ask about the songwriting process for this album, man. It seems like it would have been quite an intense process making it. But can you tell me a little bit more about it?
Sure. Yeah. You know, uh, Writing music for Khemmis is always, to use your words, an intense process because we're always, sort of mining our own experiences and digging into our lives. And so that's certainly the case here. But, 2020 being what it was and what 2021 has been as well, um, that certainly compounded a lot of the, I'll say, pressure, but not in the sense of like feeling like we're under pressure from other people or other entities, but the pressure of just existing, of feeling like you're living in a pressure cooker, you know? And we we found that as we were writing this album, that the lyrics and the musical themes and the the riffs and the solos and all of it um, coincided with a lot of sort of personal work in terms of psychological betterment and getting in surviving a lot of stuff, getting into a better place, and sort of reflecting on some kind of big picture questions that we started asking ourselves, um, you know, because we had the time to reflect on how we've become who we are. One of the, I hesitate to say silver linings of 2020 because I really don't want to say anything nice about that year. But heck, we did write this album, and it is an album that I am more proud of than anything I've ever done in my life. So like everything else, there's kind of a balance. But one of the things that came from 2020 was, you know, sort of being locked away from the rest of the world and having to ask ourselves some big questions like, what is Khemmis? What does it mean to be part of this band? Do we want to keep doing this band? I mean, to be quite frank, the band almost didn't make it through last year. We found, as we started asking these questions, we found that we were all to varying degrees disconnected from what the band was, and we felt disconnected from each other. And I'll speak to my own experiences. I felt disconnected from everything and everyone, and I had lost interest in creating. I'd lost interest in everything. I'd lost interest in living, and all of that being not only sort of fueled or exacerbated by the global pandemic and by quarantine, but also sort of finally getting a chance to step back and realize that so much of our lives had gotten routinized. I'll say that day in and day out, you wind up doing things and you stop asking questions like, why am I doing this and who am I? And this might seem sort of like stoner brain philosophy at times, but God, you get into something about your mid 30s, I think, is particularly conducive to these moments of self-reflection and self-awareness. And you start thinking, look, if I'm halfway done with this whole living thing, am I doing it right? Am I even living? And, again, speaking for myself, I found that there were a lot of parts in my life that I was just going through the motions. I was existing, but I wasn't living. I wasn't living right. And so when it came time to sort of reconvene and we start asking each other these questions and asking ourselves these questions, what came from that was not only a renewed sort of joy with creating music together, but a renewed understanding of the role that music plays in making sense of your life and making sense of your connection to other people. And those realizations, those sort of reminders about the fragility of life and how little time we have, really influenced the kinds of questions we wanted to explore in this album. Questions about, again, like, how do we become the people that we at least think we are? Are we really relegated to being no more than the sort of sins of our mothers and fathers? Are we doomed to, repeat the cycles of trauma that we have experienced? Are we able to transcend in any sort of sense, a spiritual one, a psychological one, or are we destined to always be the byproduct of genetic heritage and social environment? And finding that we had really come through some heavy stuff and come out the other side with this renewed appreciation for life, we felt obligated to tackle these things in an honest manner. And that's why Deceiver is, it's our darkest album. We've never been a band to take things lightly, I'll say. We've always tried to, have an element of fun with what we do, but we've never been a band that's going to sing about, fighting dragons and riding mighty steeds through the wilderness. But this time around, we felt a sense of obligation, first and foremost, to ourselves, to really examine these things and examine them honestly, and maybe to cloak them in a little bit less metaphor, maybe to be a little bit more open about what it is we're talking about. Because, the process of recovery, the ongoing journey of just taking it day by day is not, it's not always blue skies and sunshine, and it doesn't have to be. It's also not always the abyss.
Yeah.
And finding that balance is part of that, I think, mission, if you will, of being honest in what we do and having our art reflect, not just the sort of process of reflection from 2020, but also, the last, in my case, nearly 4 decades of walking this earth and trying to have that honestly reflect where I am. And I know the same is true for Phil and for Zach, to not try to paint a picture that is anything other than the most realistic one we can, while of course still, there is still that degree of metaphor. It's still heavy metal. Nobody wants to hear a metal band get up there and say, sometimes I feel awfully dark. It's like, oh, that's a little too on the nose. So, a little bit of poetic license goes a long way. But I think we felt less obligated to play it safe, but like lyrically and musically as well, and just to let these songs be what we felt they needed to be.
Yeah, I really connected with these tracks as well, because I think we all kind of went through that fucking 2020 made us all have a look on each other, and we're all kind of sitting in this stage of disconnection. So I think a lot of the listeners are going to get so much from this, and Khemmis has always been one where the songwriting is just top notch and the lyrics really hit home as well. It's something you can just put on, get lost in the lyrics and the songwriting and the musical notes as well, man. It's a really, really amazing album. Can you tell me a little bit about the single Living Pyre?
Yeah, Living Pyre is a really special one for me. It was the moment when I felt reconnected with the guitar. I felt reconnected with myself as a musician. I felt reconnected with Khemmis. Again, with so much darkness and really that ongoing recovery process, there are these, fits and starts of progress with songwriting earlier in the year, but I guess it was like maybe late spring. I sat down with the guitar in my hands and I started playing that first riff, and the whole thing came out, I'll say like 80% of the way it wound up on the record. And anyone that does anything artistic, anything creative, that when you get in that headspace and you feel like you are plugged in to what you need to be plugged in, and you're in the right mood, the right setting, and everything's going, and you just think, I got to stay in this space. This is where, it may sound cliche, but like, this is where the magic happens. And I was just in that headspace for the better part of a day, just tweaking riffs and really just feeling joy, feeling not just like, oh, these riffs are great, but thinking I have reconnected with something bigger than, oh, these are cool riffs.
Yeah.
And I remember, getting it sort of fleshed out. And one of the things that's different on this record is because we wrote so much of the sort of like initial raw material remotely, Phil and I learned how to use Guitar Pro, which is impressive because we are Luddites, and we've always been the sort of stick the mic in front of the cab kind of demos. mentality. But using Guitar Pro meant that, well, it meant a couple of things. One, it made sure that we didn't forget how to play things. And anyone that plays guitar knows what this is like, where you write something you think is cool, you record it, you come back 6 months later and you go, I don't know what the hell that was. What am I doing? How was I tuned? So having this sort of basically homemade tablature book meant that we weren't at risk for losing ideas, but it also meant that we could send ideas back and forth so much faster. You work up something, you send it over, and someone could just jump in that tab file and say, I love this riff, but this one note, I don't like this one note, and they'll change it. Instead of saying, change that one note and go re-record the whole thing, suddenly you're bouncing ideas back and forth 2, 3, 4 times a day. And, I sort of roughed out the song, I sent it over to Phil. He and Zach heard it, and they were like, this is, we're back. This is it. And we'd already, like I said, we already had some ideas floating around, but that was the first song to come together from start to finish. And from there, I feel like we really found our momentum as a band again. And, by the end of the summer, once it was more or less safe to get back together, we had the skeletons of all of these songs. And that's when it's time for the real magic to happen. You put us in a room, you crank up the amplifiers, and it's one thing to hear someone else's idea, but it's another thing to play through it with them, with the amps raging. And that's where we went from, we've got an album, to, damn, this is something, we've done something special. It feels, and I don't mean that in the sense of, like, oh, it's the greatest album anyone will hear. But it's the kind of thing that hopefully every band always feels excited about their new album. And if you don't, you shouldn't put that album out. You've done something wrong. But there are those moments where you, as an individual, as a group, you sort of step back and you go, that's more than the sum of its parts. That's better than we expected. And we felt that feeling from the moment we started jamming on these songs, where there was something about these songs and where they had come from and what they mean to us, that when the three of us got in that room together, we're like, this is powerful. Let's keep mining this feeling, and let's see where this takes us. And where it took us is the full album Deceiver.
Yeah, it's an unreal album. Do you think maybe having making that album and starting it out like that, being separated but kind of communicating through like this platform as well between each other, do you think that kind of help you all to get in that zone by yourselves and kind of reconnect with the music as well? How do you think that helped with the process of it all? Like, I know it was great when you got in the room together, but doing that remotely, what was that like sitting at home together?
I think it's like a lot of things. It's a little good, it's a little bad.
Yeah.
I think that moving forward, I think we're always going to use, Guitar Pro and this sort of thing. It doesn't even have to be Guitar Pro, but any sort of technological side, because it allowed us to focus in on details a lot more. And it also, there's something about seeing your music. Like, I can't read music fast enough to sit down with sheet music, but you're sitting there looking at the composition as it's tabbed out, and you're seeing like all the transitions and all of the little, harmony lines and stuff. And it lets you, I think, see a song, well, like literally see it, but like approach a song as an entire piece in a way that is sometimes hard when you're just feeling it out in the room.
Yeah.
But also there is something impersonal about sitting down with a guitar and playing along to a MIDI backing track, where like you might think it's cool, but it's a robot playing along with you, like it's so perfect. And that's not rock and roll. Rock and roll's always got to be a little rough around the edges. Rock and roll's got to have a little push and a little pull. And so I think it's the sort of thing that we found this new tool for writing and for, sort of cataloging ideas. But it also reminded us that at the end of the day, it's gotta come from this human place. It's gotta come from being in a room and talking through ideas. And also, sometimes it's hard to communicate exactly how you feel about some idea in an email or a text, because sometimes you say something that comes across like you're mad or you're laughing, and it's none of those. But when you're in a room, someone can do something. Zach can play a drum fill, or Phil can sing a line, and you can say, all right, that right there, what's happening there, that's beautiful. We got to find more of that. We got to get that feeling. And if you say that in a text, it's like, that feeling is beautiful. Like, what does that even mean? What are you talking about? That feeling's beautiful.
Yeah, I think a lot of us encountered that through 2021, man, getting lost in text message. Don't worry, you guys weren't the only one. What was recording like when you finally got together and you was able to do the recording on this one?
It was the most fun we've ever had in the studio.
Yeah.
This being our first worldwide release on Nuclear Blast meant that we could afford to spend more time in the studio. And we've never been super rushed in the studio, but this time around, we really got to approach recording the album as an extension of the creative process instead of the way that Dave Otero, who's our producer, the way he put it is, sometimes when you're under the gun and you have a tighter budget, you feel like you're going to the heavy metal factory to stamp out the heavy metal songs. Yep. And that's fine for what it is, but being able to go in and still feel like the songs are still coming to life and you're changing things around and you're, maybe as Zach is tracking the drums, because we start with the drums and he and Dave are working things out, and Phil and I come in to start with the guitars, and maybe we've changed some of the tempos, just a couple BPM here or there to give it a little bit more swing. And then when it came time to do the guitars, what we used to do is I'd go in, I'd do all my rhythms, then Phil would go in and do all his rhythms, and I would do all my leads, and sort of like that. This time around, Phil and I were in the studio together 8 hours a day for, I don't know, 3.5, 4 weeks. And whoever felt like starting that day would start. They'd start doing rhythms. Maybe we'd get all the way through a song. Maybe we'd get halfway through and we'd start thinking, that little lick could be cooler. And the other one would grab their guitar and we'd figure it out. And Dave is hearing stuff. He's throwing ideas at us. And it felt like an extension of that writing process where we came in with all the songs fully demoed out. And so we knew if we don't change anything, we've got this. But because we had that baseline, we felt the, sort of comfort of saying, okay, well, we know it could be this, but what if it's also this? What if we do add a little bit more, swing to this part, or in some cases, let's add another guitar layer. And so you've got a couple parts on the album where we added this super gnarly sort of HM2, Swedish death metal kind of guitar tone, and it's layered in there. But when it comes in, like when you hear that feedback squeal on the Death Doom bridge of Shroud of Lethe, like that's nasty. It's like it happens, and then my voice comes in, and it's layered, and it's just we were making these creative decisions in the studio. I'll give you one more example of it. The end of House of Khemmis, I have this really long melodic guitar line. And as I was tracking it, and it goes on for, it's almost like its own guitar solo. It's like 2 minutes long, and it doesn't really repeat. And so we knew we wanted to be real vibey. So turned on some delay, and I go in the live room with the guitar cab. So I'm getting stuff feeding back. And what I didn't know is Phil got down on his hands and knees next to the delay and reverb pedals and was like gradually tweaking things as I was playing. And I get done with the take that's on the album, and I look down the hall. I'm like, Phil, what are you doing in the floor? And he's like, I was playing along with you. And like these sorts of spur of the moment creative things are possible because we weren't in the situation where like, okay, we got to get this line right the first time because we got 5 more songs to finish recording. We could play around a little bit, and it really was so satisfying to ostensibly like quote unquote go to the office, go to the studio every day and not feel like we had to meet a quota. Yep. It was like, let's get this album together, but let's live in this album. Let's make it feel magic, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, and you're able to give that time to the album as well. I suppose you didn't as well not wanted to rush it out because as well what's going on around the world as well, but take the time with the album being with a label like Nuclear Blast. All you got to really concentrate is making the music, putting that time into the music, and then confident knowing that you're able to get your music around to a lot more ears being on a label like that as well.
Absolutely. And I can't say enough good stuff about Nuclear Blast. I mean, they didn't want to hear all the demos. They said, look, the album that you give us is going to be the album that we want to put out. We have faith in you. And that's big, like that for a label like that. Yeah, they could have just as easily been like, it needs to sound like this. And could have had all this conflict. They were like, look, we want to hear it when it's ready. If you want to wait till that's the finished product, we trust you, do that. And that's what we did. We handed them the finished album, and they just went crazy about it. And, I remember Monty Connor emailing me after he listened to it the first time. And he was like, I put it on and I went for, a walk around. He lives in New York City. He's like, went for a walk around the city. And I came back and he's like, you guys have done something with this album. I'm proud of you. And it feels like your cool dad or your cool uncle telling you he's proud of you. It's like, oh my God, Monty Connor, the guy that discovered Sepultura, said he's proud of me. Oh, Jesus.
That's one of the things about a really good doom metal album, and this one in particular. You can put it on sitting in a dark room, headphones, and get a lot out of it. Put it in your headphones, go for a walk around the city. There's just so much you can get from a really good doom metal album when you get lost in the lyrics, the music, the songwriting, everything about it. It must be good knowing that you guys can finally get back in touch with your fans and play again. I noticed you guys have got a West Coast tour, I think starting December going through to 2022 into January, isn't it?
Yeah. We're going up. So we're going up to New York City to play in St. Vitus in December, which is one of our favorite venues in the entire world. I just love that place. And then, we're going out on the West Coast in January. I mean, there were quite a few moments last year where it seemed like maybe this doesn't come back. Maybe touring, it might be possible for like the biggest of the biggest bands. But what happens if all the DIY clubs go away? What happens if all the, independent companies that support music like this go away? And, we're not out of the woods yet, but just being able to even announce dates feels amazing. And
it's good for the venues. It's really good for the venues too, because they've struggled through this time.
Exactly. We've got a couple of venues here in Denver. One of the ones here in Denver is called High Dive. And it's our home. We've played there a million times. We did all our album release shows there. And I was so worried that they wouldn't make it through because they don't have the backing of a big production company. It's owned by a couple of people in Denver. And the fact that they're still around, they've made it through, they're doing shows again, trying not to get, naively optimistic about the future. But for the first time in a long time, I'm thinking things might, whatever the new normal is, I think it might include a model of live music that's actually sustainable. So we'll see. Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
I hope so, because a lot of venues I know over here in Australia went through the same problem. They closed through the pandemic. And the thing is, with the metal and the underground scene, it's hard to find venues to going to fucking replace these. So it's really important for people to get along and buy tickets to shows like yours and support these venues. Grab them early, hold on to them, and go to these shows and support the scene. Grab this Deceiver album. The vinyl looks really cool too, man. That Ghost Swell vinyl looks unreal.
Thank you. Yeah, we're pumped.
I better let you get on to the next one. Ben, this has been an absolute pleasure, man. I mean it. Congratulations on the Deceiver album. It is an absolute ripper. Everyone's going to want to go and grab this 19th of November through Nuclear Blast. Any last words, shout outs, or thank yous, my friend, you'd like to add in?
I want to thank you for having me on to talk. I want to thank everyone who's supported us so far, everyone who's new. Welcome aboard. We're glad you're here. Crank it up. Practice your air guitar licks, and we can't wait to see you all on the road, including Australia. I don't know when, but we're gonna make it down there. It's on the list.
I can't wait, Ben. I'll be front row center, man. Thank you very much, everyone. Again, grab the Khemmis album. Deceiver comes out 19th of November. You're going to want to put it in the stereo for the neighbors. They are going to want to hear this one. Cheers, mate. You have a great day.